Welcome back. Getting back into our SCP-6001 Avalon video. This is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure you go check out part 1 to get caught up. And there's a lot here, guys, so let's just go ahead and jump right into SCP-6001.
David asks, why don't they just carry those atoms around in pins or wristbands instead of having chairs? Primrose responds that it doesn't want to be a pin or a wristband. It's a chair, and it wants to be a chair. That's the point of packs. Not just finding what's most useful to them, but finding where the phenom fits best. The next
makes complete sense because you let the SCP do what it wants. We kind of went over this in the last video where they basically worked with it voluntarily, asked its permission to be experimented on, asked its permission if it wanted to be broken down and made into other chairs. They found a way to communicate with it, like really went out of their way to do this like the most ethically clean way as they possibly could, and they wildly succeeded beyond anything that you could have thought was possible with a chair. It's really wild what they've been able to accomplish, and we've barely scratched the surface. So, and to top it off, not only are you like helping this chair achieve its wildest dreams, but you're also creating something wildly useful for everybody. And there's like no chance that this SCP is going to turn on you because you made it happier than it's ever been. So you benefited yourself, you benefited humanity, you benefited the SCP, and basically made everything better for everyone involved. Like, whew, way to knock it out of the park.
Next vote is from the Partnership, who state that despite perpetuating the stereotype, now is absolutely the time for the cold, dispassionate appraisal worthy of their founders.
Okay, so this is the Partnership. This definitely sounds like it has Marshall Carter and Dark involved in this one.
As A6K holds no value. Our natural resources deplete at a staggering rate. Our labor force is sickly and untrained. Our cultural dissimilarities are laughable. And they have everything we have. We wouldn't even make a good tourist trap, as all our wonders are tombs and constructs of war, or a mountain defaced with a bunch of dead people's faces.
Yeah, our universe would be pointless to visit. For a universe like Avalon, where they've achieved everything, coming to our universe would be like stepping back in time to a terrible, depressing, violent, disease-ridden like period of time where you just would not want to go.
They have the resources to help us, but why invest them in a venture destined to fail, as they didn't spend the last 100 years retrofitting capitalism and rebalancing globalism just to start all over again. They state that their counterparts in A6K need to realize on their own that they could have the whole world if they just pay the cost, and the compendium cannot afford the time and resources it would take to break them of their greed. It's clear then that not every part of the compendium is purely altruistic. The Partnership of 3 is formed of Marshall, Carter, and Dark.
Right.
So it's not surprising that they're not quite as ready to jump in as groups such as the former Mana Charitable Foundation. David and Primrose take the Everywhere chair to Manhattan, a city mostly containing glass-like buildings in different shapes and sizes. Some were tree-like, with thin elevator trunks and thousands of branching limbs, all leading to small, clear boxes.
Okay, so this must be, these tree-like buildings must be influence of SCP-1000, and one would assume that in this world of Avalon, that the SCP-1000s weren't hunted to extinction. There was no lie propagated to keep their numbers down. They were allowed to flourish and work with humans to build society and civilization and technology. Man, there's so much going on in this. It's wild. It's like taking so many of the SCPs we've seen before and showing us a world where it is possible to live with these SCPs. I really hope they tell us what happens to some of the more dangerous, violent SCPs. Like, I'm so curious now to see what the Shy Guy or what the Indestructible Reptile is like in this universe. I really hope that they get into some of those.
Primrose pointed out the one that was hers, hanging over the park. And after David said he'd prefer something a bit more insulated, Primrose muttered something about monkeys and their concrete caves. Another structure he spotted was filled to the brim with clear water and all manner of amphibious life that spilled out onto the street. David remarks that they have a strange and beautiful world here.
Yeah.
But Primrose says that he has no grounds to call their world strange, as her research has proven our world to be filled with straight-up wackos.
No argument there. Yeah, the only word you can use for Avalon is paradise. It really is. Paradise, utopia. Literally everything lives in harmony, yet technology is wildly advanced and everybody shares everything and everybody has what they need. Yeah, our universe is a chaotic mess of crazy people compared to this.
David asks why he is here then, if they've already scanned and studied his world, and Primrose just asks him to spend one full day here in this reality. David again asks why, and she says that that's the one caveat. He's not allowed to ask why he's here or how the packs work, as she could get in trouble for telling him. Instead, he gets to see the wonders of this world with a delightful talking cat as his guide.
I would be like, listen, Professor Primrose, how about you bring out whatever contract I need to sign so I can live here and let's be done with it, because let's be honest, I want to stay here. Me, personally, I could not refuse a world like this. No matter what I left behind, I could not refuse a world like this.
David looks around and sees a family having a picnic while their daughter plays with a fully animate teddy bear made from patchwork cloth. He sees a man throw a ball for his dog, and the dog throws it back. He sees a colossal, lumpy fellow, 2.5 meters tall at least, sitting on a nearby hill and playing a guitar for a crowd while singing a French nursery rhyme. David decides that this trip would make for a wonderful research paper. The next vote is from the Collective, who state that value is what you say value is, if you stop talking about gold and gizmos. If you give them one person on the other side trying to wake up the masses and shake up the system, you've got value. But now they are the system, and they're talking about shaking them up. They state that A6K needs our own experience and to make our own statements in order to define our own identity, rather than the compendium coming in and fixing all of our problems.
That may be true. You need to learn from your own mistakes, but there's got to be a limit to it, right? How many times can you watch someone fail knowing full well that you have the tools to help them succeed? And there's nothing here saying that they can't help for any reason. It's literally they're putting it up to a vote. I'd be real interested to also know, how big is this council? How many seats are at this table? How many votes are being cast?
They have to look generations ahead. And if they help us now, then our kids' are going to be just like the Compendium's world. The Collective says that if they're going to be the authority, they're not going to be the authority that destroys originality. Instead, they're going to be cool. The Artists Cultural Collective is, of course, populated by former members of Are We Cool Yet?
Yep.
So far, the vote is 2 for yes and 3 for no.
Okay, so I can see why they would take that stance. They're artists, they're rebels. They're always going to be the ones who champion individuality, being unique, not conforming, like doing things in a new, different way. So, okay, I understand why they voted the way they did based on their own ethos, the way they perceive the world and how they choose to live in it. I get it.
David and Primrose next end up at an art museum in West Africa, which from a distance resembled 5 columns of mossy stones stacked on top of one another. Each stone was in fact a large, isolated structure of thin metal and white ceramics built on top of one another with no practical means of moving between, aside from teleportation. Within each rounded complex was a single exhibit, and David says that he could have spent the whole day in the museum, if not his whole life. In one exhibit, he found a large aquarium full of lifeless, murky water, at the center of which was a statue of a man with his hands held aloft. After a while, he thought he saw children in the tank, floating with empty eyes, and as he rushed towards them to help, they popped their heads over the tank's edge and spat water at him. Primrose pointed out to him that he was standing in an area clearly marked as the Splash Zone. This would seem to be a version of SCP-1018. David then comes to a gallery of works by Robert Bobo Blythe, finding rows of paintings, carvings, and strange new media holograms depicting acts of obscene violence and perversion. The works depict things he'd never imagined in his worst or best dreams, but on his way out and seeing an aged portrait of the artist himself, David thinks that he seemed like such a happy fellow. Nothing shocked David as much as the final exhibit, though, located on the topmost stone of the museum. An amphitheater full of wooden steps and a wide glass ceiling contained only a single object at its center, protected only by a red velvet rope. When David and Primrose entered, a crowd of people were milling about it, and David found himself unable to blink for a moment because he was looking at the statue, SCP-173.
Oh!
Despite David being able to instantly recognize it, there were some differences between this statue and the normal one. Its body possessed smooth, soapstone contours, and the browns and reds on its face were now vibrant and almost luminescent. Its body was bent back until its chest formed a smooth curve, and its head nearly touched the floor, and its arms were slouched, but 1,000 hair-thin bands of metal curled and blossomed upwards, forming a great abstract cone that reached up to the ceiling. Primrose asks him if he thinks it's beautiful, and he says to ask him again when his stomach drops out of his throat. Primrose laughs and tells him that it goes unobserved for a single second every day, right at the stroke of midnight, at which point it turns itself into something completely new each day. David asks if they're worried it might hurt someone, and Primrose says that it might, if they were ever so disrespectful to lock it away and leave it unseen to wallow in its own filth. It's art, and it stops when it's seen because it wants to be seen. David.
Wow. Peanut. The peanut is a beautiful work of art here. Ha! This is glorious. I love this.
David guesses that it told them this itself, as they're somehow capable of talking to anomalies. Primrose responds that this is because of Pact 5, which consisted of combining 197 anomalies, including a peculiar ham radio, the juices of a telepathic plant, and a pan-global anomalous radio frequency after they liberated several thousand abducted children from a Russian folk demon. She says that the statue isn't much for talking, and they figured it out the old-fashioned way, with trial, error, and patience, along with trusting that it couldn't just be a concrete killing machine. David says that he doesn't think he could ever have that kind of trust, not with what he's seen.
You know, that's why I kind of wanted to know about these more dangerous SCPs, because this gives a lot more insight to them. 173, the peanut, the statue, is not just a literal murder machine. Like, he made a good point. It stops when you look at it because it wants to be seen, and it's pissed. It's pissed at the fact that you lock it away in a cell where it can never be seen. So it takes it out on its captors. Like, it makes sense, you know? And here's another example where they work with it and they say, okay, you want to be seen? We will build you a place where the only point of being here is to look at you. And apparently he's observed so much and so often that there's only 1 second a day where he's not observed, and that's intentional so that it can take a new pose and be observed in a new way every single day. Frankly, that's beautiful. Like, wow, okay.
The next vote comes from the absent party.
The absent party.
State that they warned us and we didn't listen, so they cannot redeem us. The absent party is simply a new name for the nobody group or person of interest, and they voted no, putting the vote at 2-4.
Okay, 6
David
votes.
and Primrose next traveled to Point Zero in Australia, although he couldn't have guessed it just by looking around, as they were inside of a glass dome the size of a small airport terminal. Outside, the area was lush and tropical, filled with trees stretching high above the dome, and David felt surreal at not being able to identify a single plant. The trees had bark layered like armored plates, and flower bulbs hung off thin fibers like a fishing pole and lure. He got so caught up in looking at the trees that he almost missed the massive reptile in front of him on the other side of the dome. And when he finally noticed, he panicked and turned to run instinctively. He tripped to the ground and scrambled back with a primal fear as he stared at it. SCP-6002. There was a wall of shatter-proof glass between them, but David knew that wouldn't stop it, and 682 moved forward a step. Primrose stepped between the two and the reptile stopped. She tells 682 that David's only visiting, and it stared at him for a moment longer before turning away and disappearing into the tree line. Primrose apologizes to David, as she just had to see it for herself, since the killer instinct of the Immortagon is legendary. David assumes Immortagon to be their pet name for it, but she corrects him, saying that Immortagon is its genus, and that's what they call all of them. David then looks beyond to the clearings to the west, the hills to the east, and the rainforest in front of him, seeing hundreds of 682s. They were clearly the same creature as 682, but they looked healthy, with limbs coated in pale patterned scales and their bodies covered in thick shaggy coats. Primrose says that they're the second deadliest animal on the planet, as they were third until the compendium got rid of mosquitoes, and humans still get the top rank, of course.
Wow, okay. So the reptile is there, and he's not just there. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole species of them just running around freely. That's, wow. Still known as essentially the deadliest creature on the planet, but they have clearly come to some kind of understanding. It almost seems like 682 was able to sense that David wasn't from here. He was foreign and that he was afraid of him. The reptile's still clearly intelligent, as it's always been, but they seem to have come to some kind of agreement. These guys are crushing it. Like, everything they're doing, they are absolutely crushing it. I'm flabbergasted. I'm amazed.
They're immortal by any means other than themselves, and she says that they work a bit like lions mixed with lobsters, as once one gets big, old, and slow enough, the rest of the pack devours it. She says it'd be disrespectful to call them a nuisance, but as long as they kept a wall between their lands and hers, they stayed out of sight. They knew the Immortagons were intelligent, and they had tried to reach out to them, but they killed every messenger. David then asks what anomaly voodoo miracle they performed to pull this off, and Primrose says that they didn't do anything, or at least nothing overt. One day they just stopped, as one of their researchers crashed into a nest of Immortagon, and they didn't kill him. He walked through a whole field of them during their mating season, and the rest assumed that that would be the end of researcher Clef, but he got out unscathed. They don't know how they changed the Immortagon's thinking, but when they went back and asked them why, they said that we were no longer disgusting. David and Primrose proceeded to...
I think they can sense something about people that's not overt, you know? Like, maybe they can sense, like, fear and emotions and maybe even, like, intent. They can sense when someone's intent is not good or is threatening or is even afraid of them. This is this is wild.
To sit and look out over the jungles of Australia, seeing countless other creatures, some foreign to David and others terrifyingly familiar. Freakish raptor dogs ran in packs and barked at each other in arbitrary English phrases, SCP-939. A flock of birds larger than airplanes soared overhead, although Primrose told him to ignore them, SCP-1160. A procession of humans walked by, dressed in...
There's a couple of these SCPs I don't know. They seem like they're probably smaller SCPs, like the dogs and the birds. Probably less influential SCPs, but...
woven leaves and carved bones, and they were headed to the coast, holding a long eel skeleton above their heads. A young girl waved at David, and he waved back, but no matter how hard he tried, he cannot recall her face. David again says that Primrose has a strange, beautiful little world here, but Primrose says that that's the cat calling the kettle black, but he shouldn't repeat that, as it's a cat phrase and only cats can use it. Her and David laugh, and she asks if he's hungry again, and he says that he is, in the way only near death could inspire. The next vote is from the workshop, who says that they're only here because they drew the short straw, as normally they keep their heads down and their hands busy, and stay out of politics and policy. The compendium sends them phenom, they send out packs, and they each stay out of each other's business. If the compendium wants to know what the workshop thinks of A6K, though, they think that we're wimps. When you're working with Prometheus's fire, sometimes you get burned.
Okay, so these guys are Prometheus labs, I assume.
Sometimes you create a black hole when you stuff an improving machine inside of itself. Sometimes you create an army of cyborg super zombies.
They put an improving machine inside of itself. Did they use the clockwork on a version of itself to improve the improving machine? Oh my goodness. Oh, no wonder their technology is so crazy.
And sometimes you misplace the entire population of Massachusetts, But that doesn't mean you stop trying. You clean up the mess and get back to work, as the world doesn't get better otherwise. The workshop says that the partnership is mostly right, as A6K doesn't have anything that they don't have. The only resource that we can offer them is innovators, but all the real innovators are labeled as kooks, crackpots, and idiot savants. They say to let us figure out how to build a better spine, and until then, they can't work with us. The workshop union, made up of the factory and Prometheus Labs, votes no, putting
the factory and Prometheus Labs. The factory is still something I want to check out.
Vote at 2-5. David and Primrose next go to Herman Fuller's Museum of the Extraordinary in Nashville, Tennessee. They had picked up some pizza in Detroit, apparently the best place to get pizza in the world, and David remarks on how fantastic it is despite being entirely grown in a lab.
Okay.
They had come to Nashville in a plastic shell that Primrose had called a transport pod, and David asks why they even have them if they can just teleport. She responds that they still need to move couches, and asking a chair to help move a couch would be deeply insensitive. They walk through a pavilion wrapped around a magnificent 3-story stone fountain surrounded by lines of green moss and semi-circular buildings. David had been surprised when Primrose suggested seeing more museums, as it was exactly what he wanted to do.
I'm not gonna lie, I'd be the same way. If I was in a place like this that had all this kind of stuff, yeah, that's what I want. Take me to every art museum, take me to every science museum, take me to all of them. That's where I want to go. Take me to the interactive exhibits, all this kind of stuff. I'm assuming they probably don't have zoos, seeing how they're not really into putting things into captivity. But hey, give me all the other stuff, all the museums, all the crazy things that I can look at and learn about, and give me the interactive library or whatever chip that they're putting into their brains for the internet, because oh my goodness, I am all about that. Anyways, guys, I think we're going to call it here for this video, just not to make it too long, but we will continue this in part 3. There is so much stuff going on in this universe, but it is absolutely fascinating. The way that they're able to use some of these non-hostile SCPs, but the way they do it, where they work with the SCP, they communicate with it, they learn what it wants, what it needs, and it finds a way to work the situation out as best it can for both parties. The chair one was a huge example of that, where, hey, it wanted to be a chair. It didn't want to be a pin or a bracelet, so we made it into chairs. We made it what it wanted to be because that's what it agreed to be. And then you see some of the more hostile SCPs, like the statue or the reptile. The statue is getting what it wants. It wants to be observed. It wants to be appreciated because it's a piece of art. And they set up a situation where it can do exactly that. And because of that, no killing sprees. Even the indestructible reptile, while it still may be pretty dangerous, and even in the world of Avalon, it was known to be a dangerous, hostile creature, eventually, even the reptile came to the conclusion, hey, this place is pretty great. The people here are, if we want to be left alone, they will leave us alone. They will honor our wishes. Maybe we don't have to eat every single one that comes through here. Again, I want to know more about these groups that are all involved in this. I think we're up to, 7 or 8 votes now on this council. And it's neat to see how these different groups of interests are coming together to create these new groups that then they themselves come together in this council and vote on things. It's really interesting. It's really cool. I really, really like this. I hope you guys like it as much as I do. If you do, leave a like. Subscribe to see more like it. We got more SCP-6001 coming up in part 3. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching the video. Take care of yourselves and have a great day.